Scanning for audio.
Welcome to It's In Dog podcast. Right, this week, for 1 week only, it's Sylvester McCoy week with Big Finish. The reason I'm doing this is that you wait ages for a Sylvester McCoy story to come along, and 3 come along within 5 weeks of each other. So this week, we're not exactly playing catch-up, but we are looking at an entire trilogy, one story every day. Main range release number 189 is Revenge of the Swarm. Now, I know I'm not particularly spoilerific about Doctor Who and Big Finish in general, but I do feel that I need to say that this marks the end of Hex's journey. Hex has been with the 7th Doctor, well, for about 10 years, possibly longer. It doesn't feel like it. It just feels like, oh, isn't he the guy who used to be in Brookside? No. This is a fantastic male companion, one who was just, well, ignored. Fitz gets more press than this, and he's only been on the audios once, and existed mainly as a literary character. On the pantheon of male companions who have story arcs, who have motivations, who have things happen to them, this guy's just, well, ignored. And it's about time we put an end to that. This guy's story arc is actually over 2 generations of his family, 3 if you count his nan, played by Jean Boat, who was superb in the last story. But I am getting ahead of myself. Basically, these 3 stories, this trilogy, marks the end of his arc, his massive storyline. Of course, being Big Finish, he'll probably return to us in some form, or there'll be some sort of flashback. But this definitely feels like a gear change, a mark-up, a moving on of narrative. So, story number 1, the one we're covering today, is of course Revenge of the Swarm. Ringing bells with anyone? Anyone who's seen Into the Dalek of late on TV will have had bells rung when it comes to shrinking people down and entering their own system. The Swarm was the creature in the 70s Tom Baker story that introduced K9, the invisible enemy. In that story, the Doctor and Leela are partially shrunk and enter the Doctor's own body in order to help defend him from a tiny, tiny invader, a sentient virus that, once it comes out and gets expanded up to human proportions, the macro universe as it will, it becomes a life form that wants to spread out to the universe and take, obviously, control, become a god. Becoming a god is a very important aspect of these 3 stories, something that you have to keep in mind. I would like to use the word trope or meme, but I don't. I don't use those in this podcast as well, you know. Basically, it's a recurring theme. So, that's your 70s story. At the end of the 70s story, it is dispersed. Except, of course, when it comes to Big Finish, because when it comes to Big Finish, no creature is truly dead and truly gone. And remember, the virus was voiced by John Leeson. John Leeson being K9. It's nice to have an actor of such standing, not just being, well, forced to play the tin dog. So, obviously, the Nucleus survived. It jumps in to Hex, except, of course, as we all know, because we've been following the narrative, he's not really Hex at the moment. The personality that was the original Thomas Hector Schofield has been removed. Now, as listeners, we all know where this personality went. But as narrative characters, the cast all think that the personality was put into a big glass bottle by some elder gods. Don't ask, it made sense at the time. And then this bottle was smashed. We suspect at this point that that's just not the case and that his personality was actually put inside something else. But again, that's just conjecture and not important. The important part is that the person who's inhabiting the body of Hex is a variant of the original personality. Think in terms of the goddess in Angel who had taken over the body of someone else. Does that make sense? I don't want to spoil Angel episodes despite the fact that it was, 10 years ago. Or was it 20? Oh, let's get back to you before we start freaking out about that sort of thing. So basically, on the narrative front, that's the storyline. The Nucleus had hidden inside the TARDIS console until it could find a vessel or a companion that it could leap into and then take control of the TARDIS. And that's exactly what happens. Possession is 9/10 of all Doctor Who stories, as nobody has ever said. So this possessed Hex takes the TARDIS 70 years back before the Tom Baker story and introduces a whole new level of threat to the station, which of course, as all space stations are in Doctor Who, repurposed slightly for this. References to the original story are left, right and centre. The whole how things are written down, the fact that no one can spell in the future, or things spell in different ways, more phonetic spelling, which in the 70s was a big thing and is majorly responsible for the fact that I had a reading age that was off the scale and a spelling age that was... Let's leave it there. Dyslexia is a terrible creature, especially if you want to be a writer. I've rambled, haven't I? Getting back to the story. The story itself is good. Don't let that distract you. It feels like it could have taken place in, say, one of the McCoy stories, say 2 or 3 years after the TV series finished. Imagine it's sort of 1992. That's when it would feel good. There are references to the fact that Ace is a time traveller because she's referencing things outside her own time frame. She references the film The Matrix. It is perfectly believable that she has at some point been taken by the Doctor to see these films. That's not a problem. I can live with that. Referencing things beyond her own time frame and her time experiences is perfectly understandable because she's Ace, and she's Ace, so that's fine. Narratively wise, it does have a whole non-linear plot in the sense that you don't need to have seen the original, but it helps. Because in the original they go into a body, and in this one the virus decides that it wants to go on the internet, or whatever it's called in the future, basically becoming a galactic-wide mental entity, and eventually wanting to become physical. These things are particularly well made, and the narrative does split directly into 2 halves, Disc 1 and Disc 2, which I'm using obviously because you'll be using the download, so it's episodes 1 and 2 and episodes 3 and 4, set in very different time zones. You've got timey-wimey stuff going on, you've got narratives, plot, you've got an extension of the original arc which makes sense. This virus is hard to kill, and of course, being of Doctor Who of its time, computer viruses and the rendering of such avatars works. Of course it works on audio, and as so well done with Big Finish, you always get the effects in your head are of the same standard as good effects would have been on the TV. Does that make sense? You're not imagining something that couldn't possibly have appeared on TV. You're imagining something of the same standard or slightly better, but not terribly better than what was in front of you. For example, when the Wirren turned up in the Wirren stories, you were still imagined bubble-wrapped creatured hands. You didn't imagine something spectacularly gory, unless it was called for. Here, similarly, the design of the inside of the virtual reality or the Matrix or whatever you want to call it, the inside of the computer, smacks of how things were portrayed in the 90s. It's a thing of beauty. As an audio, it works tremendously well. But more importantly, McCoy is totally on form. For this trilogy, he's not calling it in. He's not just going through the motions. He is absolutely spot on, beat for beat, perfect as the Doctor. I worry about Sophie Aldred's voice as time goes by, and the fact that she's spending quite a large amount of her time being Trifu Tom. There was a couple of moments when she's getting excited and trying to give commands out that she did sound a bit Trifu. She's a 50-something-year-old lady, and I'd rather not go any further down that road. Playing a 16-year-old girl. Kudos to her. I'm not complaining. That sounded so much worse than it was meant to. Moving on. All in all, a great story, a nice introduction to the arc, and well worth getting. I'll give you the trailer, and then I'll be back in the next few days with part 2, story 2 of this trilogy, Mask of Tragedy. But first, here's the trailer. Be seeing you.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions.
If you've become accustomed to Hector being Hector...
I won't want him to become Hex again. There must be some way of getting him back. We just have to find it, that's all.
Revenge of the Swarm.
Leave me alone. Get out of my head.
locking Hector in his room.
What?
He's not capable of flying the TARDIS, so something made him program the coordinates.
We're a scientific research team. We're instructed to find a living carrier of the plague virus.
And I've just given you what you wanted.
I am the greatest being the universe has ever known. A sentient virus.
We will all die together, and you will cease ever to have existed. I should have recognized the symptoms. Oh, I should never have stepped out of the TARDIS.
Contact has been made.
Subscribers get more at bigfinish.com.
You've been listening to the Tin Dog Podcast. Doctor Who and its connected properties are copyright and trademark of the BBC. No infringement is intended. To contact the show, email tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk. Whostrology, a Time Traveller's Almanac, is available through Telos Publishing or Amazon. Visit www.whostrology.com for further information. The Tin Dog Podcast is a founder member of the Doctor Who Podcast Alliance.